All right, in this explainer, we are digging into a document called the Hydra, and what it alleges is pretty staggering: the existence of a highly coordinated system that links together corporate power, high finance, and non-governmental organizations, NGOs. So the source material really kicks off by asking a fundamental question. Is what we're seeing with mass migration a series of spontaneous, kind of organic events? Or, as this analysis argues, is it actually a managed process, one that's facilitated by a really sophisticated and interconnected system? Now, to really get what this analysis is arguing, we first have to wrap our heads around the core concept they use as a framework: eighth-generation warfare. The best way to think about it is less like a traditional war with soldiers and tanks, and more like, well, like a hostile takeover of a country's entire operating system. The goal isn't to blow things up, but to gain control of a nation's key systems from the inside out. Okay, so to break all this down, we're going to follow the four key pillars laid out in the analysis. We'll kick things off with the intelligence detect pipeline. Then we're going to follow the money through the financial architecture. After that, we'll take a look at the on-the-ground network, and finally, we'll examine what the source calls the interlocking directorate that supposedly ties this whole thing together. So the analysis starts by tracing the origins of this network to a very specific intersection: the world of elite military intelligence and the tech giants of Silicon Valley. According to the source, this is the wellspring of the capital, the personnel, and even the operational doctrine for the entire system. Right at the center of this pipeline, the analysis points to something called Unit 8200. Now, this is an elite unit of the Israeli intelligence corps, and people often compare it to the NSA here in the United States. Its official job is signals intelligence and cyber warfare, but the source describes it as something more: a de facto talent incubator that has essentially become a critical feeder program for the entire global tech industry. And this visual from the source material really tries to map out that direct pipeline. It shows how veterans from this one single intelligence unit have gone on to found some of the world's biggest cybersecurity and tech firms. We're talking Palo Alto Networks, Wiz. It even highlights a venture capital firm, Team 8, which was co-founded by the unit's former commander.
Okay, so with that tech connection established, the analysis then says, let's follow the money. It lays out a financial architecture that it claims is specifically designed to fund the network's on-the-ground operations, using a combination of public legitimacy and, importantly, private deniability.
So these documents point to two parallel funding channels. On one side, you have your direct corporate grants. These are transparent, they're public. But on the other side, you have what the source calls a financial black hole: donor-advised funds, or DAFs. And these are instruments that allow for non-attributable funding, which effectively masks who the original donor was. So how does that even work? Well, it's actually pretty simple. A donor gives some assets to a DAF sponsor, say the Silicon Valley Community Foundation, and they get an immediate tax break. Then they simply recommend where they'd like that money to go. The DAF sponsor is the one who cuts the check, and just like that, the original donor's name is kept off the public record. The source material then provides this table of what it calls verified financial links. This is meant to connect the tech companies and philanthropic groups we've been talking about directly to the NGOs operating on the ground. So for example, you see Palo Alto Networks, that's the company founded by a Unit 8200 veteran, and it's listed as a corporate supporter of HIAS, which is a major refugee resettlement agency. So, with the funding in place, the analysis then pivots to how the network actually operates on the ground. It describes a logistical pipeline that it claims stretches all the way from the jungles of Central America to sanctuary states right here in the US. The analysis lays out what it calls the migration continuum, which is basically a clear end-to-end process. It starts with capital from that tech ecosystem we talked about, which then finances the NGO network. Those NGOs then facilitate movement through dangerous places like the Darién Gap, and then finally they provide legal services to anchor individuals once they arrive in the US. Now, here's a really crucial detail from the source material: the allegation that this activity isn't just random. It claims the NGO work in the Darién Gap is part of an official, US-backed policy. And this policy, which it calls controlled flow, was designed not to stop migration, but, and this is a quote, to expand the capacity and speed of movement right through the region. And to illustrate what happens at the very end of this pipeline, the analysis points to a direct quote from the public materials of SOAR, a refugee resettlement agency in Oregon. Their own list of populations served explicitly includes individuals with criminal histories. So this brings us to the final layer of the analysis, the leadership structure that allegedly connects all these separate threads. The source uses this concept of an interlocking directorate to argue that the worlds of tech, finance, and policy all come together at the very highest levels. Just so we're all on the same page, an interlocking directorate is when a member of one company's board of directors also serves on the board of another linked entity. And it's worth noting that in the US, this is actually illegal between competing corporations to prevent collusion. The source material really zeroes in on one specific company that it calls a central integrator. It argues that the board of directors at Microsoft serves as a central hub, connecting many of the otherwise separate parts of this whole network. Now, this part is really interesting. The analysis highlights what it calls the Rodriguez contradiction, an initial suspicion that Leon Rodriguez, who's on the board of the NGO HIAS, was also on Microsoft's board, was proven to be wrong. They're two different people. The Microsoft board member is Carlos A. Rodriguez, the CEO of ADP. The source presents this to make a crucial point. The system is more complex than just one person wearing two hats. It's about separate entities that are executing parallel missions. Okay, so let's turn to the connections the analysis does say it confirmed, starting with Microsoft board member Reid Hoffman. According to the source, this is how one individual connects multiple spheres of influence. Reid Hoffman sits on the Microsoft board. He was also a co-founder of PayPal, which the analysis labels a debanking tool, and he co-founded FW.US, which is a major bipartisan immigration lobbying group. Next up, the analysis points to two other Microsoft board members, Charles Schorf and Penny Pritzker, who it claims form a kind of nexus between big tech, big banking, and global policy. The formal links are laid out pretty clearly here. You've got Charles Schorf on the Microsoft board while also being the CEO and chairman of Wells Fargo. And then you have Penny Pritzker. She sits on Microsoft's board, is a former U.S. Secretary of Commerce, and is a board member of the Council on Foreign Relations. But the analysis also goes beyond just the formal corporate roles, highlighting what it calls an informal interlock. You know, that golf course connection, where powerful individuals get together outside of their official jobs. And as an example, it points out that both Schorf and Pritzker serve together on the board of a prominent cultural institution, the Kennedy Center. So, we're left with this central question that the analysis posed at the very beginning. Is this an integrated, intentional network, or is it just a series of coincidences among powerful people and organizations? The source material that we've just walked through, well, it presents one possible answer, a single, unified map of what it claims is a coordinated system.